Let's pray. Lord God, we come to this place to be filled up, to know your presence, to know the ways in which you care for us day after day, and we know that as we come here, we can lay down our burdens, we can be in this place where we know your love and your grace, and we're reminded and strengthened to go back out into this world. So as we go out into this world, may we carry with us this gift that you give us each and every time we gather. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So today's sermon is going to be a little different than some other sermons I've done in the past, because I'm going to try and weave in some things from our visioning from a couple of weeks ago into the sermon itself, because I think that they apply. And I think it's also good for us to be able to talk about, well, who is it that we're trying to be? Who is it that we as a church, as a people of God, are trying to be? So I'm going to start with Psalm 23, and I think most people are at least familiar with Psalm 23, with, the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He leads me beside the still waters. He leads me beside the green pastures. It's a very peaceful, a very calming image. But it's a calming image, but it's also an image that it acknowledges that life itself is a struggle. Even though I walk through the darkest valleys, or in the old version I grew up going, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And, there is that image of a banquet. You set a banquet for me, but where does God set the banquet for us? In the presence of our enemies. That there is this place where, even though there are all these other struggles in the midst of the world, it's not that God says, wait for everything else to be perfect before you get to enjoy anything of what's going on. That we have these moments where we can come together and we celebrate this banquet that God has for us. And it ends saying, that I will dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long. That is a place where we want to be. And again, I know I'm preaching to the choir right now because y'all are the ones who are here today. That I'm preaching to the ones who have found this reality, who have found this reality that, there is this joy of dwelling in the house of the Lord. And yet, there are an awful lot of other people who aren't experiencing that reality. And so I think that maybe sometimes it's good to come back and just take a step back and say, okay, here is the reality I've come to know, but what else is going on in the world around me? So, I am very thankful. Each one of you made a choice to be here today, and you had other options. There is a football game on right now that people could be watching. There is, if you're not a football person, there are many other activities that are going on right now, because the reality is the world has not stopped just because it happens to be Sunday. When we did our visioning a couple weeks ago, I asked people to kind of gather together by when they came to rejoice, and then to talk about what was a memory they had of the place. And as they talked about the memories, a lot of different words came up. So as we were kind of capturing that moment, it's like words like welcome, words like family, words like acceptance. Were coming up out of those individual times where they were sharing something that happened in their time there. And I felt really good about that, because that's part of who we want to be. So about 8 years ago was when we came up with the logo that we used, and trying to say about this is who we want to be as a church. So within this are these basically 6 images. So there's the cross with the heart in the center, which kind of goes back to the heritage we come out of, saying we are a Christ-centered people. We are a graceful people. That's where the Luther comes in. But the other 5 images were to represent individual words. So if you go from the light blue all the way around the circle, the words there are to represent invite, welcome, rejoice, grow, and serve. And those are all good things, but, and then again, I think we do a good job of being a place where people feel welcome for the most part. That was one of the things that came up over and over again. Now, are we perfect at it? No. It's not something we continue to grow at, but I think that's a part where we do okay with that. I think for the most part, when people are here, they do rejoice because it is, we aren't a place where, I'm coming up and saying, here's everything that's wrong with life. But I think there is something that we come together, we celebrate. We are growing together. We do have opportunities to serve together. But I think when it comes to inviting, I think that's an aspiration right now. So, when we hear Psalm 23, again, it's the image of the Lord is my shepherd, I'm the sheep, And sheep are typically pretty happy just going where they are led. But there also comes a point to where, that image is fine for a time. But I think we also need the image of our gospel reading where there are the servants or the slaves that are sent out that have a message to tell, to say, there is a banquet that's prepared for you, and you are now welcome to be a part of it. So, part of the reason this sermon's going to be a little different is because I am going to give you something to do. And some of you have gotten a letter from me in the last week. Some of you will be getting it this week. So, one of the things that came up when we were doing our vision is, hey, we would love to continue to grow as a church. We would love to continue to grow with having more families in the church. And so when I thought about this, and I kept coming back to a friend of mine whose name is Anthony. Anthony's a pastor in a church in Ohio right now, but we serve together in Oklahoma City area. And when Anthony came to interview at his church, now Anthony was not a Lutheran pastor before he came to that church, so he was a little more open to speaking in a way that was not quite as nice as what I normally do. And so when he was interviewing, they said, Pastor Anthony, can you help us get our kids back? And his answer, he looked them dead in the eye and he said, who drove them away? But one of the reasons I bring that story up is because I think that sometimes we have to be able to tell truth, though. Is that until we can start to tell the truth and we can start to understand what's going on in people's lives, we're going to experience sometimes the same thing that the very people in the parable experience, where they go out and people say, oh, that's fine, I'm busy. So, when I ask you how you're doing, the answer I most often get is fine. But the answer I get second most frequently is I'm busy. I'm busy. As if that is a badge of honor in our society, which I think for a lot of people it is. I'm busy because my life is full and I'm doing all these different things, so my life must be good, right? Because I'm always busy. I'm always doing something. And if I'm not doing something, I can pull out my phone and I can be entertained right there at that very moment of, here's everything that's going on and all these different things, and we have all kinds of important things going on, and so in the midst of a thing where everything is important, it's hard to know what's really important. And I think that sometimes we as a church, we're always meant to be a stop sign in people's life, is saying stop, rest, take a deep breath, listen. So, do you know why commercials are the length that they are? Or do you know why a TikTok video is the length that it is? Because that's what they think people's attention span is. About 30 seconds. And in a time where our attention span has gotten that short, it's very easy to fall back in that space where I'm not listening to you, and you're not listening to me, and we aren't listening to each other. And so I love Frisco and McKinney and the area where we live, but I will also tell you that one of the experiences that people have in Frisco and McKinney is that they come home, they pull into their garage, they close their door, and they don't come out again. Because they're working and they're exhausted. And on the one hand, that's fine, but I think that we've lost some of that connection that is a part of what life is supposed to be. And so here's where I have a challenge for y'all. So, y'all know the definition of insanity, right? It's doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So, if you want to continue to grow the congregation, and you want to continue to have that be Adam and my responsibility, let's be honest, that's insanity. So, here's what I'm challenging you to do. I'm challenging you to do two things. So I want you to have a conversation. And I want you to be in the space of listening for this conversation. So in this conversation, I want you to, if you're in the space where you have a young family and you're you can talk to somebody in your generation. If you're older, I want you to talk to somebody one generation younger. But I want you to talk to somebody, and I want you to just be in the space of asking for permission to say, I just want to listen. I'm not going to here to judge you. I'm not here to give you the answers to anything, but I want to know some different things. So can you tell me, for example, what's something that's important to you? What's something that's really important to you? What's something that matters in your life? Now, I do want you to bring in, this is a spiritual conversation, but I do want you to bring in something to say, hey, well, are you a spiritual person? Or are you a Christian? Are you a part of the church? If you're not, were you ever? And if you were a part of the church, what made you stop? I don't want you to be in the space of listening and learning. So I don't want you to try and, judge anybody on this. I want you to hear these things. If you were a part of a church and you stopped going, are there scars you bear from that time? For a lot of people, there are. And if you were to ever consider being a part of a church again, what would you want that church to be? Now, I do not want you in that conversation to bring up Rejoice. I don't want you to be able to say, hey, I got the church for you type thing. That's not the space of this conversation, because that's where you've stopped listening. I want you to be in this space where I'm here to learn. I'm here to want to know you're part of the conversation. Now, you can have this conversation with somebody locally. You can have it with somebody who's a part of your family. You can have it with somebody. But again, whether it's a phone call, whether it is inviting somebody over for a meal, but again, we don't listen to each other anymore. So this is an invitation to do that. So that's one. So we are going to have events throughout this year where there are times to invite people to. And, whether it's something like Trunk or Treat, whether it is something like Christmas or Easter or things like that, I do want you to do that. We're going to give you easier ways to do that in the future. But when you invite somebody to something, here's what I want you to do. If they say they are willing to come, I want you to say, when you get in the parking lot, text me. And I will come out, and I want you to come sit with me. So, when I was in my last church, I served with another pastor, and since there were two of us, we had this practice where each of us would go to two different churches each year while the other one was preaching. So we would take 2 weeks out of the year and just go experience what's going on in other churches. And so the very first time I did this, so I go to one of my friends who is a Lutheran pastor in the Omaha area, and so I drive up to her church. And remember, I'm a Lutheran pastor. There's no liturgy they're going to do that I cannot do, and not only not do it, I cannot lead. I know what the readings are going to be for the day. I know who the pastor is already. I know all these different things. But as I'm pulling in, it's like, where do I park? And then I look at the church, and where's the front door? Because I wasn't sure with that church, so I ended up actually pulling on a couple doors before I found the one I was supposed to go in. By the way, that's one of the reasons I stand out front. Was that experience said, hey, people need something they can identify, this is where I come in. And where do I sit that I'm not sitting in somebody else's seat? Because y'all are creatures of habit. And so it was one of these things, and just the reality of, even though I've grown up Lutheran, not every Lutheran church does exactly the same thing exactly the same way, and if I'd not grown up Lutheran, there would be a lot that I was coming in and saying, well, what is this? What is this way of thinking? So what I'm asking you to be is, if you're willing to do that, to be the host for them this week, saying, hey, come sit with me And I'm here for when you ask questions. I'm here for when you don't know something. And I'm also here to say, hey, this is my friend John Smith from work, or this is Susie Jones, who I know from my neighborhood, and she's my guest here today. So I'm not asking you to go out and say, hey, I'm going to invite 50 people this year. I'm asking for 2. And I'm not going to tell you that that's going to necessarily grow our church to what the expectations are, but I can tell you it's not doing the same thing over and expecting different results. And I also want us to share our experience in doing this. So that's one of the reasons I had Adam set up an email. And so when you get if you get the letter, and I know that when some people get a letter that's 3-page long, the first thing they say is too long, didn't read. So if you can't read the entire letter, get to the back page. Because that's where it has this part of it, where it talks about some of the questions I want you to ask. It talks about, how I want us to be inviting people. And then also, us sharing that experience together. Now, when you go out and you do this, is everybody going to say, hey, what you're doing sounds really great and I want to be a part of it? No. You're not, because the reality is, if you ask them how they're doing, they're probably going to say that they're busy too. And just because they're busy doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them. But what we are inviting them to is to come to know some of the experience that you have had. And to know that support that's there in the midst of all the things going on in the midst of life. In the midst of life, that we know that in the valley of the shadow of death, our God walks with us. He guides us and He supports us. We know that in the midst of the times where we may be experiencing enemies, that God sets a banquet for us and says, but I have a space for you here, and your cup overflows. And that maybe, just maybe, you can share a little bit of the joy of coming to know what it is to dwell in the house of the Lord and celebrate that. To invite others to come and know what you've experienced, because God's prepared a banquet for us. And yes, we go forth from this place still hungry, but we're hoping for what God is doing in our lives and in our world. And so, thank you. Thank you as thank you in advance as you kind of step into this, because I know this is not comfortable for Lutherans. It's not something we normally do. But it's also us trying to change culture a little bit. It's us trying to live into this identity. It's us trying to learn how to share what has been shared with us. Because sometimes it can't just be 1 or 2 people who are doing all the inviting. Y'all have access to a whole lot more people than I will ever. And occasionally I like to go with you. So thank you. Thank you as we go step together into this.